What a difference 3 inches can make. Oh, behave, you. But really, the difference between 3 points to 1 point to potentially none, for example, had Phil Coutinho's right-footed volley from a Leon Bailey cross not been 3 inches to the right and hit the post, and Ollie Watkins couldn't convert because he didn't react quickly enough, we could be talking about something completely different today. 3 points, finally ending a curse in the third strip, which, by the way, even though it's cursed, is a beautiful strip. It's one of the best third strips we've had. Let's be fair. A little detail on the side. And by the way, you can order yours through this show by hitting the link in the description below. But had Phil Coutinho shot 3 inches to the left, and that goes top bin, and Villa are celebrating 3 full points, we're having a completely different conversation today. But as it is, and once again, we are left wondering, where is this Villa team really at? I don't know. Nobody knows. Let's dissect. Leeds United 0, Aston Villa 0. Here's the gift that perfectly sums up how I felt after the Leeds game and for the vast majority of this season as a whole. And I'm going to admit to you that it's getting harder and harder to do this show each and every week and get excited about doing it, because when I have to talk about the same problems, the same issues, week in and week out, I get bored of it, and you probably get bored of it too. This is a difficult ground to come to. That's why it's so disappointing that Villa couldn't take all 3 points for the second straight year, as we present the Holy Trinity show and the 3 key issues or moments that defined Leeds 0, Aston Villa 0. We'll start with the key statistics, which, you know, when you're up a man an hour into the game, they're going to probably favor you. There were some interesting stats that include Ashley Young's chances created. But across the board, Aston Villa were dominant in this game except for the one stat that matters. 5 big chances, none of them converted. Ashley Young himself created 5 chances. There are positives to talk about, and they include the defensive details, the stuff Steven Gerrard talked about post-Arsenal, showing players onto their weaker foot rather than their preferred one, closing down with your feet rather than your eyes. All those details were on display. And when you think about back-to-back clean sheets and only 1 goal conceded between City, Saints, and Leeds, there's progress, especially with all the defensive disruptions through injury. Also, Jan Benderak looks a footballer. He likes to have the ball. He wants the ball. Looks like he makes the right decision and can play a pass. And when he doesn't have the ball, he looks untroubled, frankly. He's not a small lad either. Maybe he could even get into the opposing penalty area and every once in a while actually direct a football from across on target. And I still think at some point this season, he'll be the one lined up next to Tyrone Mings at center back. But my predictions have been utterly woeful this season, so what do I know? Here's a big issue that seems to be getting bigger and bigger every week. We are dire from dead ball situations. Villa had 9 corners to Leeds 2, and I don't understand why Leon Bailey just doesn't use that left foot of his like he did to great effect a couple of times last year and this year in preseason by swinging in the left-footed in-swinger from the right wing. Douglas Luiz has earned the right to play in the right-footed in-swingers from the left wing. He went for goal a couple of times, but other times it felt like he didn't even clear the first man, and I didn't want to go back and count because I didn't want to watch the game again. But then there were all the free kicks. Villa had twice as many, some of them in areas where they could put the ball into the danger zone. Do you remember even one of them that looked threatening? Maybe the one where Watkins peels off and gets the ball down the inside right channel, only to then not pick out a teammate in the middle of the penalty area. Has Austin McPhee moved away from set-piece duty exclusively to something else within the coaching staff? Because it seems like we're either without imagination, or maybe it's just poor execution. I don't know. But for a team that's struggling to score, this is a way home, and we've got to improve in this department. Number 3, more injury issues. I was wrong about Augustinsson starting. Well, what a shocker there. All my other predictions have been wrong, even though the only predictable thing about this team is that you're going to be left disappointed after the performance one way or another. And maybe 2 90-minute performances for Sweden was enough to convince Steven Gerrard to give the guy a start. But 6 minutes in, he is horrendously late on a challenge and has to take a yellow card. And then 38 minutes later, he pulls his hammy and he's off and likely done for quite some time. Not that he was setting the world on fire either, because 43% passing efficiency from 14 passes. And Steven Gerrard actually had a go at him for throwing a ball backwards rather than positive, which is what the manager wanted. But here we are again. 4 injuries now to our defensive core already this season. Not optimal. That forced a reshuffle, and although I was happy that Jan Benderak got a run in at center back, Ezri Konsa at right back, okay defensively, but painful to watch when he had to try to figure out when to run, where to pass, when to pass, who to pass to. It was so disjointed, and you can't blame Konsa. You kind of figured that that would be the solution there. So we have to pray that Matty Cash is ready to go on Monday at his former home, the City Ground, against his former team, because we've actually missed his exuberance and his effervescence going forward. If he's not available, I'd almost rather see Leon Bailey play as a wing back than putting a center back there. Big issue number 2, the Sinistera sending off. If you were like me and you saw that second yellow turn to red, you were probably thinking, oh, we've got it in the bag now. But then I remembered that Aston Villa Football Club is absolutely inept against a low block. At Bournemouth, at home to Everton, in the later stages of the Crystal Palace game, at home to West Ham, even parts of the Southampton game. When the opponent sets up and bunkers in a low block, we are incapable of going around, over, or through them. And you'd think with guys like Coutinho and Buendia, this would be precisely what they were brought in for and are capable of doing. But as every minute of that game ticked by, I was wishing it was back to 11v11, because during that phase of the game, Aston Villa was clearly the better team, creating the better chances. And if we're being completely objective here, they looked the more likely to score. And the number 1 big issue or moment that defined Leeds 0, Aston Villa 0, Watkins woes. I'm going to try to approach this from a strictly non-emotional and analytical viewpoint, because I've made it pretty clear. I really, really like Ollie Watkins, the guy, the dude, the character. And when you like a human being, it makes it so much easier to cheer for them when things are going well, and you empathize when they are not. The pundits on Matchday Live for this game, where I was watching, were Michael Owen and Shawn Wright-Phillips, 2 strikers who I think you could easily put in the predatory category, and both of them summed up Ollie Watkins' last year and a half perfectly. Michael Owen said this, and I quote, "Ollie Watkins is one of the best in the Premier League at leading the line, but he's not a natural poacher." That's a pretty broad statement. We'll get back to that in just a moment. But then Owen went even more detailed in his analysis and pointed out something I'd never noticed before, where Ollie Watkins' eyes are as he shapes up to the ball. The prolific strikers all have a little glance to see where the goalkeeper is, and then the technique takes care of itself, whereas Watkins, and maybe just where his headspace is right now and has been for the last year, it seems, he's so focused on the football and getting the connection right, he's not seeing that. And so we see these shots that are straight into the goalkeeper's legs or just wide of the far post. I'd love to go back now and revisit some of those big chances and how many fell in that category, where if he just punched it under the equator and popped the ball up those 4 feet, committed goalkeeper can't get to those. Where were his eyes, during those chances? And hey, he's smashed his fair share through the goalkeeper along the ground. The 2-0 goal at Brighton last year, the goal at Arsenal a couple of years ago in the closed door game, even the 1-0 against Crystal Palace was along the ground, but you get my point. He scored some of those goals, but how many has he missed where he could have just punched it, dinked it over the goalkeeper? And listen, Michael Owen and Shawn Wright-Phillips, they were prolific goal scorers. This is a detail that they noticed. I don't think you can debate them on it. Now, back to the question of whether Watkins is a natural poacher. He scored more goals as he got older in his career, which is weird. First under Smith, then in that year after Smith, where he was the Championship Player of the Year, 25 goals I think he banged in for Brentford. Comes to Villa, scores 14 in his first year in the Premier League, 3 of which came in the 7-2 game, the anniversary of which was just a couple of days ago. Put it on if you're feeling sad these days, by the way. It'll make you feel better for a few moments. So my question is, what happened to that Ollie Watkins? And the only answers I can come up with are confidence and the change in manager. There had been rumors of friction between Watkins and Gerrard already going back to last year. And remember, he didn't start in match week 1. After this game, Steven Gerrard again goes public and says, "If I criticized the defending at Arsenal, it's only fair that I criticize the forward play in this game." I'm not trying to make excuses for Ollie Watkins, but remember, his relationship with Dean Smith was so close that his teammates jokingly said, "How's Dad doing? Are you going home with Dad for dinner?" I mean, Dean Smith took what I think is a late blooming player, made him an ever-present, and trusted him to do the business. And Ollie Watkins repaid him. And in the year after Smith left, he was prolific with Brentford, and he made a better transition from the Championship to the Premier League than Ivan Toney did with Brentford, based solely on goals. So what happened? A managerial change, and even though Watkins scored a beautiful goal, the game winner at home to Brighton, Gerrard's first game in charge, ever since then it has not felt right. And I think for the first time in his senior pro career, he was being challenged. Different managerial style. And maybe for the first time in his career, he was doubting himself. And if you're doubting yourself, if you don't have the confidence or the mojo, you're done as a striker. You must believe you're going to score. And let me ask you this. If your boss went to you and said, "I don't think I trust you to do the job," how would you react to that? Because something's not right with Ollie Watkins. His body language, his facial expressions, there's no joy, there's no excitement. Even the interview pre-Leeds, he just looks a shadow of what he did a couple of years ago. So Watkins, former Championship Player of the Year, now struggling. And look, you have Emi Buendia with Norwich, Championship Player of the Year, comes to Villa, can't even start for the club. And this theme is not just limited to those two. Go down the list and see who else is depreciating in value right before our eyes because their form is way off. Why? Well, one of the reasons is if you're going to make a managerial transition and you aren't going to replicate the style and personality type of a manager, you at least have some continuity on the systems or the formation or the playing style, because Villa did neither with this transition. And the good news, if you believe rumors, Mauricio Pochettino falls right in the middle of Dean Smith and Steven Gerrard. He has that cultural side, the lovey-dovey, kind of like a dad guy who likes to kiss cheeks, he says, and feel and shake hands and hug. But he's also demanding of his players, and he has a very credible playing and managerial background because he progressed both Southampton and Spurs all the way to the Champions League final. And although it didn't work out, he was at the helm of a huge club with some massive stars. Now, just changing pace for a quick second, I had a couple of amazing viewers of this show share with me some very detailed insights from the Supporters Trust meeting with Christian Purslow. And based on some of the questions and some of the answers from Villa's CEO, my suspicions on certain things have been confirmed. Like, for example, the question of whether Villa has a footballing philosophy like, say, a Barcelona. Christian Purslow said, no, we do not have that. He would love that, but that would take 15 years. I don't necessarily agree with that, by the way. And this idea that there are criteria, characteristics, and principles for each and every position in the club that are consistent, whether you're a women's player, a senior men's player, or academy player, I guess that's better than nothing. But the great football clubs are able to marry all those principles together. What Aston Villa feels like to me, and here's a hell of an analogy, they're going to the fine shops and buying the really nice ingredients without having a recipe or without having any idea what the dish should look or taste like when it arrives at your table. The other thing that was abundantly clear based on the details coming out of that Supporters Trust meeting was that Christian Purslow has a hand in virtually every single footballing decision that occurs within this club. He admitted that he personally spent months trying to keep Carney Chukwuemeka at the club, and when he realized that that wasn't going to work out, he had to do what was in the club's best interest by getting the best deal possible. He said he was in Diego Carlos's living room to sign the deal while all the other clubs in the world were sleeping. Why would the CEO need to be in a player's living room to sign that deal? He said he had a very difficult time trying to move on players that were out of favor on the fringes of the club and how that's the hardest thing to do in football. He even went to Australia, by the way. Thanks again, Coopers, for the great gear. Why would he need to go to Australia and embed with the team in preseason? Why? What kind of corporate business is going on in Australia during the preseason? I mean, I'm sure there's some. But he was the one who said, we got off that plane coming back from preseason as high as you could be confidence-wise, and none of us saw what was going to happen next at Bournemouth. So he's a CEO with a Harvard background, and as I've said numerous times, not a shred of footballing IQ. He's involved in football decisions. He's not a football guy, and for me, that is a concern. I took it with a giant grain of salt, but imagine if it was true that Sawiris and Edens had actually personally and privately engaged with Mauricio Pochettino because they'd run out of patience with Gerrard to see if he was interested in taking on Aston Villa. If that was true, everybody at Villa Park would be walking on eggshells right now, especially Christian Purslow, because for me, there was never any massive managerial, wide-scoping search. This was a matter of Purslow saying, if we don't get him out of Rangers for ourselves, somebody else will, and we're going to miss out on a great future English manager. And we don't need non-football people making those kinds of decisions. A great example at Arsenal, okay, in the All or Nothing series. You know who really impressed me in that series? Josh Kroenke, the big American with the big long beard. He supported Mikel Arteta during the difficult times. He actually asked him, are you okay? What can we do to help you right now? He supported Edu. Edu's the sporting director. He let Edu make some difficult decisions with his team. But Aubameyang was a difficult decision. He supported them. That's what the upper executives reporting to owners do. He didn't come in and said, well, in American football, we would do this, or in basketball or baseball, we would do. No. He let the football people make the football decisions. And I just wish Aston Villa had somebody at the top like an Edu who makes the philosophical football decisions. Then we need the eyeballs. I think we have a few people with eyeballs in our club already. And to me, the eyeballs always supersede the analytics. The analytics support the eyeballs. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but that's how I'd like to see it done at Villa. All right, let's go through the motions and tally up these points that really don't mean anything when you can't win a game away from home at a club that you've done very well against with an extra man. Away from home now, 1 from 12 points. Woohoo! And another clean sheet from Emi Martinez. The rest stays the same. Do you know I was half expecting a club statement to come out on Monday morning, and that's why I delayed recording this show just in case. I guess we'll have to wait at least another week now, but Forest, rock bottom after losing to lowly Leicester 4-0 on Monday. And what's incredible is how much money they've spent to be rock bottom. Of an all Midlands-ish bottom three with Leicester and Wolves as it stands right now. I mean, you talk about pressure. What's going to happen first? The Forest owner having a jammer or firing Steve Cooper? Hopefully it's not the latter, and it doesn't look like it will be because, as a Villa fan, you always have to worry about the new manager bounce, and yet I still worry about this game because Villa is playing so wound up tight right now. The pressure seems to build week after week. And then there's Jesse Lingard. I still have nightmares about Jesse Lingard in a West Ham United jersey against Aston Villa. And yet, a win would put Villa in the top 10 of the league. That's how weird this league is this year. In fact, Villa has as many victories as Liverpool does right now. Monday will be Canadian Thanksgiving, one of the great days of the year. The harvest, the leaves turning, the crisp air, the fire in the hearth, turkey leftovers, and vitamin G. That's gravy. And I know Aston Villa will find some way to ruin it all for me. But until that time, try to stay positive. It's always darkest before the dawn. And as always, up the mighty Villa. Happy Canadian Thanksgiving, eh? We call this a toque.